Allegory Story. My name is Tegan Aline.
My name is Melanie Nevis.
And today we are launching our third season, which is going to be all based around, like holiday related things, holiday related myths, different types of festivals. We just wanted to explore all of the interesting things about this time of year that we haven't fully gotten to explore because we're both like you know living in modern times, and I think a lot of us just default to Christmas. We maybe want to incorporate some Yuleness into it, but it's hard. So today we're gonna start by diving into all of this stuff.
And I think we have to specify again, like these are all Western things. I'm sure there's a lot of really interesting holiday traditions that exist in other places in the world, but we're sticking to Western European.
Yeah, we're trying to tell stories that it would make sense for us to look into. And obviously there probably are very many interesting stories and different celebrations from all over the world. And we would invite you, if you come from a culture that has a really interesting story and you'd like to share it, please get in contact with us, because we would love to invite people on the show to talk about these things as we build the show, as we go further. So you can always find us at the Allegory Story Podcast at gmail.com and on Instagram at the Allegory Story Podcast. So we're around, and we're definitely open to including other people's stories. We'd like to hear from the voices of those cultures for that. I think it's fair to say.
Yeah, definitely. We could do our research, but it's nice to have personal accounts and stories that are shared.
Yeah.
That's the aim.
Yeah.
I think, when we go into stuff like that.
Yeah.
Ideally.
So with that in mind, this episode, we're going to be talking about solstice, specifically winter solstice. And in particular, I decided that, or Mel and I talked about it, and we decided to start with this episode being winter solstice because winter solstice, I realized after doing the research, was a bit tricky. It's kind of like an umbrella, right? So it encompasses a few things. It encompasses like an actual occurrence in space and in nature. And because of that occurrence, pretty much human society, has been able to follow it and create cultures and create mythologies around it. So when I was like digging into it, I was thinking, oh, wow, really this kind of encompasses this time of year, I guess, which is approximately like in December, like mid December, leading up into like what we would talk about as like Christmas time, so leading up into the 25th, and maybe even continuing after that. Like we celebrate a solstice day, a winter solstice day, but ultimately there is like the time of solstice is like that time of year. Is that fair to say? Okay,
definitely.
So disclaimer.
It's really dark.
Disclaimer, you guys. I feel like I'm gonna do my best. Okay, like I'm not feeling fully confident in my material today, but I'm gonna do my best. So if I make some mistakes along the way, again, I'm happy to be corrected. Just don't be a dick about it, and just be nice, and I'll be open. So yeah, like I said, winter solstice is both a naturally occurring part of nature and a widespread cultural celebration. It's something like we kind of intuitively know. And I think that really speaks a lot about the time of year as well. Like we kind of get a sense of it because we start to think about winter when all of a sudden starts to get dark really early.
It gets dark so early and the light doesn't come up for so long. Days are so
and
short.
all of a sudden, they're shorter and they're colder too. And so that's kind of like how we know that winter is coming, and specifically how we know that solstice is coming. But there's actually like an actual astronomical like occurrence that actually happens. So here are some general facts about solstice and winter solstice. The first general fact is that the word itself, solstice, comes from the Latin sol, which is for sun, and I think it's sistra, which is for stand. So it means the day the sun stands still. So I think that's interesting because it's used in like both summer and winter solstice, but I guess it stands still in a different way, technically.
Yeah, I think so. I think that makes sense. It stands still. It's just at one point, it means that it's up there for a really long time, and another time it's up there for very little. I don't know. It's early in the morning for me. We record this always early in the morning for me, and I'm half asleep.
Don't worry, I feel like on the same page. But I sent you a little diagram in the
Mm-hmm.
Facebook chat, not
Yeah.
not to say you need to look at this, but just because I didn't know how to explain this visual. Because scientifically, solstice is when the Earth's poles, so the North Pole and the South Pole, reach their maximum tilt away from the sun. So if
Yeah.
we're thinking, so it's interesting because if you look at that image that I sent you, you can see where winter and summer solstice is, and you can see that one is tilting in one direction quite far, one in the other direction. The part where my brain started to get a bit screwy with this is when I started thinking about the fact that a solstice also depends on what hemisphere you're in. So
Right.
we're in the northern hemisphere, so we're celebrating the winter solstice, but people in the southern hemisphere, this is the summer solstice, and vice versa.
Yeah.
Which was a little bit of a brain entanglement for me. And it really shouldn't be, because like I know that, but there's something
Australia
about,
is entering their summer soon. They're stoked.
yeah, I
Well,
know.
maybe not with all the wildfires, but
Yes,
anyways,
yeah, stoked. Stoked.
maybe not.
Yeah, I hopefully they're not receiving as many wildfires this year as in previous
Fingers
years.
crossed.
Let's hope.
Yeah.
Because everybody's been feeling it from like coast to coast, I feel like these days.
Mhm.
Yeah. So, another thing, sorry, that kind of like took me out.
Sorry.
No, it's fine. So we know winter solstice is the one day of the year where the daylight is the shortest, right? So you can either look at it as having the least amount of day or the most amount of night, depending on how you want to look at it, and vice versa. So the summer solstice is the one day of the year when the light is at its longest and the night is
Yay.
the shortest. So this year, again, like I said, it depends. So solstice kind of changes depending on where you are slightly.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
of course, if you're in, like we just talked about, the different hemispheres, so it would change a lot there. But like even for you and I, so you're in the Eastern Standard Time zone in Canada, and
Yeah.
I'm in the, what is it, like Central European time zone here in France. So this year, the actual winter solstice, and I should preface this by saying it's really cool because these days you can literally like go on the internet and type in what time is winter solstice, and it'll literally tell you like the down to the minute when it actually happens, like when
Yay,
the sun
science.
actually goes down fully, when like when the night is at its peak or whatever. Whereas like way back when, this is such an old part of our history as humankind that they couldn't measure it as accurately as we can measure it now. So they had like interesting tools and things that they would use to try and measure it. But for us this year, for you, it'll be December 21st at 10:27 p.m. Eastern Standard Time.
Okay.
And for me
Cool.
here, it will be the 22nd at 4:27 Central European Time. So
4:27 AM or
AM,
PM?
AM.
Yeah, okay. Okay, that makes more sense. I was like, yeah, okay. Yeah, because
Yeah,
you're 6 hours, right? Yeah.
yeah. So again, it kind of shifts based on what time zone you're in. And I think honestly, if you have a North American centric mind, like I tend to have, because I was like living in Canada all of my life until I moved here, I didn't necessarily grasp the fact that it would slightly change a little bit. Like I have grasped that fact, but I didn't really fully sit with it and be like, so when is it
I think
actually,
you just
you know?
don't think about it. Like, you don't need to think about it. Why would you?
Well, I mean, it is very interesting if you are really into solstice celebrations, and more specifically, if you follow any type of like, like Wicca practice, or any type of witchcraft
For
practice, like we
sure.
talked about in the last ones, because the timing actually, um,
Well, that matters, but I mean, like, why would you pay attention to, like, the time zones that are not your time zone is what I mean.
oh yeah, you wouldn't,
You wouldn't.
but you wouldn't even think, yeah, you wouldn't even think to check. So I'm just letting you
No.
guys know. You might want to check depending on where you're listening from. It might be different even from our time zones, you know? So also it should be mentioned that a lot of places, especially in the northern hemisphere, and I got the impression this was like European northern hemisphere, consider solstice, they call it midwinter as opposed to solstice, and there's a bit of a history as to why they call it that. But ultimately it's always been a special time of year because it's so clearly marked for people. Like even if you
Mhm.
don't know exactly what time the solstice is, it's pretty, you can feel, it's something we can all feel. We can all feel the leading up to like the longest night of the year, you know what I mean?
Mhm.
And also historically humans as a group were economically dependent on monitoring the seasons. Like when we think way back to kind of like, let's say, it's been speculated that this event could, or tracking this event could go as far back as the Neolithic era, so like the New Stone Age era.
Mhm.
And because these kinds of events were often connected to different types of things like harvest seasons and mating seasons and storage seasons. If they didn't have, they didn't have the tools that we have right now, they didn't have refrigerators, they didn't have the type of storage systems that we do now, so they would have to be thinking long in advance. As it's getting colder, how am I going to mitigate like these animals that I have? How am I going to make sure that they breed at the right time so we have enough food and this and that and the other thing? And all of these things were connected to this, and because of that it was really a way that they could mark time, which I think is really really interesting. I also was reading that starvation, especially in the northern hemisphere, this was something people really had to think about, because starvation, especially from the months of January to April, were at its highest, because obviously we're both from Canada. We know how the weather is between January
Yeah.
to April. Maybe not so much
Yeah,
April anymore, but
people can't necessarily go out and hunt as they normally do, and they can't take care of their livestock in the same way, right?
right,
Everything just
exactly.
becomes much more difficult, and you have to ration your food, and,
Hmm.
um, we forget I think that we forget that we are animals
Mm,
ourselves, and, like,
mm.
it is very much based on survival during this time of year, and there are a lot more dangers in the winter than there are in the summer.
Yeah, you have to really think about a lot of things and kind of. I feel like now in our modern society, we dealing with our mental health in terms of winter, but
Yes,
our ancestors would have been thinking about how to actually stay alive. You know what I mean? So like
100%.
during midwinter, they would like hunker down, get into that vibe of the deep winter. They would know that it was around the corner. So they would oftentimes slaughter all of their livestock, meaning that winter solstice would be one of the few times where there was an abundance of fresh meat, because they would enjoy some of that fresh meat, but then they would like salt a lot of it to keep
Mhm,
over the following months coming up, the famine months, right?
mhm.
And because of all of this, because of you have to imagine there is very much this connection. We think of winter solstice as a symbolic connection to death, but could have been also a very physical connection to death for like our ancestors,
Definitely. I
having to go through their livestock and just like kill everything, because it's easier to do that than having to worry about having grains and things for them to eat through the winter to keep them alive through the winter.
Yeah, you keep a few alive to, let's say you might like keep a cow alive to like give you milk or a goat or something like that. And you keep a couple just to have as a mating pair for when the spring comes around. So you can kind of
Mhm.
rebuild that population again. But you need to survive. The whole point is to fatten them up through the year so that you can then slaughter them.
And then there's also that element of, feasting, because at that time they are going through and like slaughtering the animals and then having a lot of fresh meat around. It's not like it's something that's always so common. So
No, no, it's a celebration.
there is that concept of feast and abundance that's kind of connected with
Mhm.
all of it as well. And so here we land in this time of year that is really dark on one hand and has a potential for a lot of, in the times where we feel the darkest, it's where people rely on hope the most, you know what I mean?
Definitely.
So there's also that element as well. And when we come up to solstice, we know that the longest night means like the day after that, the nights are officially going to get shorter. So it's looked at as like this birth period, birthing of the sun returning. And, the
Mhm.
sun delivers the warmth, it delivers the nutrients, it delivers everything to kind of like bring life back to the seasonal parts of the world, right? So from that,
Exactly.
so many there's probably more than I've looked into, obviously there is, but there's so many cultures that have developed like mythologies and stories around this. We have like in the Germanic traditions, and when I say Germanic, I'm talking about an area that spreads from modern day Scandinavian countries into the British Isles, into modern Germany. At one point, those would have all, like quite a long time ago, would have been considered Germanic tribes. And even in other parts of Europe, they would believe that the winter solstice was when the goddess would give birth, bringing more light into the world. So in Norse traditions, they would call that Mother's Night, and it's actually the
Mhm.
first night of Yule. And this night of celebration is like really heavily connected to Frigga, and Frigga in
Mhm.
the Frigga. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it right.
I
Sorry.
I don't
I
know.
didn't.
I say Frigga, but I very well could be mispronouncing it.
Okay, if I'm mispronouncing that, I'm sorry. I don't mean to, because she sounds like a really cool lady. But she's obviously she's the mother of Norse mythology. She is like the
Mhm.
queen of Asgard, and she's often associated with this night because she's connected to a group called the Disir. I hope I'm pronouncing that right, and it's a group of ancestral and abundance goddesses. So like it's a group of goddesses that like all of these different cultural groups would like kind of pray to around this time. The whole idea is the same, is that they're related to them, like it's their ancestral goddesses and they're goddesses of abundance, so they bring abundance down to the people, which again really connects when you're thinking about the feasting we just talked about, the idea of the sun coming back, and all of
Mhm.
these kinds of things. In Greek mythology, we actually covered a little bit of this story last season when we talked about Diana. The story of Apollo's birth is said to have happened at winter solstice. And what we learned in the episode we did on Diana, Artemis, and Aradia is that Apollo is the Greek god of the sun and light, as well as other things like archery and music and dance and truth and
Mhm.
prophecy and healing and diseases.
Yeah, he's good
And
at a lot of stuff.
he's got a lot of stuff. Well, like he's the light bringer. So the light bringer,
Yeah,
I think, is
exactly.
always associated with healing and all of these things. But
Yeah.
archery is a funny one. Anyways, but of course, when we talked about it in that episode, we were actually talking about his twin sister, Diana. So the story is that when his mother gives birth, she's actually like cast away by Hera. Hera hates her, and she's on this island. And first Artemis, sorry, I'm conflating the two, but Artemis first is delivered into the world. Their mom gives birth to Artemis first. And it's interesting because Artemis and Diana are connected with darkness, like dark matter.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
then she turns around and helps her mom deliver Apollo. So helps bring the light through.
The
So
light.
there's
Yeah.
that connection again of the darkness giving way to the light in the connection of Artemis and Apollo, these two twins in Greek mythology. So,
Everything has balance.
and the same goes for Egyptian mythology, as Isis's son Horus, who is a sun god, is also said to have been born on winter solstice. So again, we're seeing that symbolic storytelling of long nights, birthing sun, birthing the new day,
Yes. Yeah.
birthing the warmth. So, with that, equally, there are so many cultural celebrations and even places that are connected to solstice. Um, that's basically what this season is about, more or less. So, like Saturnalia is another episode on this season we're going to cover. The holidays of Yule, even Christmas, they're all kind of like under this umbrella of this like death
Yeah.
or birth scenario. It really depends on how you look at it, right? Because in Christmas, when we're dealing with Christian lore and Jesus, it's like the birth
Don't
of
get me
Christ, the
started
birth
on.
of light.
Yeah, but that doesn't make. Yeah.
Oh yeah,
Don't get
listen,
me started with it because realistically, he was born in the springtime because that's when
I
there are a
know
bunch of baby boss.
they bought a bunch of baby boss. Yeah, I think they've actually traced it to like somewhere in like July. I think is when they say he was actually born. Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
I think we've covered enough
Don't
things
get me
to
started
this.
on that. Yeah.
We've covered enough things in this podcast to know that things are layered upon things are layered upon things, and the Christian stories are just more or less, in a lot of ways, the latest renditions of stories. But it doesn't mean
Pretty
that they're
much.
accurate. It doesn't mean that they're
No, no,
accurate,
no,
you
no.
know. So I have
We
to
never asked for perfection.
you really can't. It's kind of impossible with the history of humanity. It's literally like it's part of my French, but it's a clusterfuck. It's just
Yeah.
like everything's stacked. It's crazy. So I want to make a little quick side note in relation to cultural events and places, because there are a couple very notable cultural places related to Stonehenge. So they are Neolithic and Bronze Age sites. One is very, very
Oh, you mean
famous.
solstice, related to solstice.
What did I say?
You said related to Stonehenge, and I'm like, that's fine,
I
Mom.
gave it away. No. Okay. I think I was just about to say solstice for Stonehenge. Yeah. Sorry. A lot of sites that are a few important sites connected to solstice. Oh man, I really gave it away there. But yeah, Stonehenge in England and Newgrange in Ireland. These are both connected to solstice. People who have studied both places note that the main accesses of these monuments have been aligned very carefully on a sight line. So, like a sight line of where, like if the horizon is flat in front of you, I think a sight line is like what you could see with your eye, basically. So
Mm-hmm.
they've uh, built these accesses on sight lines to point to the winter solstice sunrise. So in Newgrange, it points to the winter solstice sunrise. And then in Stonehenge, it points to the winter solstice sunset, which I thought was pretty
Cool.
interesting. And so this is a side note because listen, Stonehenge is crazy, and trying to fit research into Stonehenge into this would
That's too much. But
and I think we're gonna do a whole thing on Arthurian legends, and there's connections to
yeah,
Stonehenge and all of that. So I figure we'll just I'm gonna leave that for another time. But it's still interesting. These places are really significant related to that.
fun fact though,
Yeah.
Newgrange is actually, it's been carbon dated to be about 500 years older than Stonehenge, and it's also older
What?
than the Great Pyramid of Giza in Egypt.
Wow. That's fascinating. We'll have to
Yeah,
look at
fun
that.
fact.
We'll have to look into that one too I don't know if that will be
Yeah.
connected to any, but I really just
I don't know, it's
genuinely
just a
don't
fun
know.
fact.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I'm excited to do that season. We've talked about it multiple times, and every time we're like, yeah. And I think we should probably do it again. So what I did want to talk about in relation, it's very weird. I'm about to go down a wonky road, and you're probably going to be giving me side eye halfway through it. I swear. I swear.
Time will
I
tell.
swear. I swear it makes sense. So I wanted to, so as I was doing the research for this, obviously there are lots of feast celebrations, like we listed some of the celebrations, we listed some of the mythology, but there was one that really stood out to me as bizarre because I didn't know really anything about it. But I have seen visual reference to it in a bunch of art that I like. So I think I'm pretty sure I've told you because you were at my house last Christmas that I'm super
Okay.
obsessed with Swedish pop music, like Swedish pop
Oh, yeah.
dream electro stuff. And I
Yeah,
have
yeah,
this
yeah.
one, there's this artist that I absolutely love. And I'm just going to use this as an excuse to plug her. Her name is Iona Lee. She's amazing. And she released this album a few years ago called Everybody's Afraid to Be Forgotten, and she always does these really cool audio visual concepts together. So with that album she did an entire movie, like an hour-long
Oh,
movie.
cool.
And it's really interesting because there's a scene where she's walking through the snow and she's bound, her hands are bound, and she's wearing this like super awesome Comme des Garçons outfit, actually. But she's being led by these like priestly looking types. Like it looks like they're taking her to be burned somewhere. And they
Oh.
actually like strip her clothes and they put this white dress on her and then they put this crown on her that has all of these like tall white tapered candles around it.
Oh,
And
interesting.
it looks really cool and it looks kind of eerie, but I've seen a little bit of this reference before, but I have no idea like how in any way, shape, or form it's connected. And I don't know if I mentioned that when she's in this procession, she's actually in the snow. It's the winter time. So I came across this story, about the feast of Saint Lucy, and it actually is connected to this artist. Is I'm pretty sure she's referencing the feast of Saint Lucy in that clip.
Mhm.
But I saw the candle wreath on the head and I was like, oh, okay, I have to look into this. Like, I want to know what this is about because it's
Yeah.
also the connection to winter solstice and working with candles, which I think, I don't know
Oh.
about you, but when I think about winter solstice, I always think about the Winter Solstice Festival in Toronto that happens with the Red Pepper Arts Spectacle and that they put on in the park every year. And they always do like a candlelight thing. There's lots of candlelight references when you grow up with like a Christian Catholic context. So I was trying to figure out like where the candles fucking come from. I think this is
I
it.
just figured it would be like lighting the darkest night in the year, but obviously there's more to it.
No, I think honestly that is kind of it. But there's
Yeah.
a little bit more to it that's interesting. So,
Tell the story. Tell the story.
okay, so this is about the feast of Saint Lucy, or Sancta Lucia, as they say
Mhm.
in the Scandinavian areas, right? So her feast day is December 13th. So we know that that's like a little bit before our solstice now. Um, so here's the thing, I don't recall ever knowing about this holiday, or somehow it didn't click with me when I was growing up Catholic, but it's really predominantly celebrated in Italy, in the Scandinavian countries, all of them, and also sometimes in England. It's kind of celebrated mostly there. So this is her rough backstory. Okay, so Saint Lucy is actually the patron saint of blindness, which
Hmm.
I already see symbolism in that related to darkness and seeing your
Yes.
way through darkness. Okay.
Yeah.
So, just for context, this is a Christian story. It's taking place in pre-Christian Italy. So, like in the time where, like Roman Empire exists, still quite it's pagan centric at that time.
Mhm.
Christians haven't taken over yet, and Christians are getting persecuted there at the time.
Right.
So she was actually born, St. Lucy was born in Sicily. And the story goes that she came from a wealthy family. Similar to Mary Magdalene, she denounces all of her wealth for God. And she kind of wants to give up everything and just follow God, follow Jesus, basically. Um, Lucy's mother, though, is sick. And she's sick and she's worried that she's going to die and her daughter isn't going to have any security. So her mother tries to go and arrange a marriage for her, but she arranges a marriage to a pagan man.
Mhm.
Um, so Lucy is very worried for her mother. I don't think she wants to get married either, but she's more worried about her mother living. So she prays to a saint, a different saint, Saint Agatha, who has already been venerated as saint for many, many years before this. And Agatha answers her prayers and heals her mother, and her mother is no longer sick. And because Agatha answers her prayers, Lucy kind of convinces her mother to let her take her dowry for her marriage and distribute it amongst the poor and help the poor with
Okay.
it.
That's
So,
generous.
yeah, she's,
Yeah.
Christian mythology is cool in its own way. It's
Yeah, it's a
weird, but
lot of donating what you have to the poor. A lot of
which
Franciscan monks and Benedictine monks and stuff did
which is
this.
interesting when you think about the church. But good on the saints for trying to
Yeah,
do the right
that's
thing.
a whole
Anyway.
other thing.
Yeah. But yeah, so she ends up distributing her wealth, her dowry essentially, to
Mhm.
people that need it. And then basically when her suitor finds out, the man that's supposed to, this is where the story gets dark. When he finds out that she has done this, he's really angry. And because of this, he wants her persecuted. So he goes and tells the governor at the time, which is pagan, he tells her that she's a Christian. And because she's a Christian, the pagan governor sentences her to be sent to a brothel to be defiled.
Okay, hold on.
Yeah.
So it's just it's still
It's
like
a Christian story. You got
I'm
to
gonna
take.
believe him and not talk to her at all.
Oh
You're
yeah.
just automatically gonna take his word over hers.
Well, yeah, I think they're just pissed that she
Yeah.
gave the money away, and maybe pissed that she may have given the money away to a cause they don't want supported. So
Gosh darn it, woman making her own mind
yeah,
for
but
herself.
the fuckery of it is that her sentencing is to be raped.
Yeah, that's so fucked up.
Like she has
That's
to
so
go
fucked
to
up.
a brothel and like be defiled by like who? Like the people at the brothel, the soldiers or whatever. Like that's how they
So
want
they're
to punish
still
her.
they're just like that's how they want to punish her, but it's also very presumptuous to just assume that she hadn't already had sex.
So one of the things I should say is that I didn't really specify it before, but she is kind of noted as being like a virgin.
Okay.
And when she says that she wants to give up all of her wealth and kind of just follow God, she just wants to keep her, she almost think of her as like an early stage nun, right? Like she just wanted to like
Yeah,
follow
she
God.
wants to be married to Okay, so and just to be clear cuz you mentioned that she wanted to follow Jesus, but like
Yeah, sorry,
at the
I said
time
Jesus.
that
I know I
this
said it and I was like, it's not really Jesus.
Okay, as I was just like this is still pre-Jesus, right? Also Jesus was Jewish,
I'm
but
actually not sure if it
Christianity
was.
came after.
I'm pretty sure it's before that, but I'm not 100%. I could be wrong.
Okay.
But I do think yeah,
Cuz
I think or it might be in the time of Jesus, but like Jesus wouldn't have been as known yet. I'm not really sure. I'm not sure.
it must have been well, no, now we're talking this out. It must have been after cuz Christianity was
Now
becoming
we're
Jesus.
talking this
Sorry.
out.
Oh god.
Oh, it's
Again,
fine.
it is morning.
I tried not to dive into timelines too deep on this one, but I do dive really deeply into the timelines of things in a lot of the other episodes and Saturnalia and stuff. But for this one, I was just like, I'm feeling too overwhelmed by the timelines. So I'm
Yeah,
not
that's fair.
100% sure. But anyways, she's sentenced to be defiled, which makes me just cringe. The fact that I even had to write that down upset me today.
Yeah,
So,
understandable.
but what happens is this is why she's venerated as a saint, okay? So what happens is the guards show up to the brothel, and I don't, it's unclear to me whether it was the guards that were meant to defile her or they were to bring her there or whatever. But either
They're
way,
not complacent.
I think they were meant to bring her to the brothel. But the thing is that she's unmovable. They're unable to move her for some reason.
Okay.
So because they're unable to move her, they all go and they tell the governor, and now the governor's really pissed off. So he says, "Okay, fine, light her up. She's going to die." So they put
Not
all
cool.
no. So they stack all this wood around her and they're going to burn her alive. And they go to burn her alive and the wood won't light. Like she won't burn. Or the wood lights and it burns and she's not burning inside of it. Like that's very
Mhm.
Christian. Yeah. So I'm sure that's what it was. She's just like not burning in there. You know what I mean? So then they're even more pissed off. And then they're like, and then finally he's like, fine, gouge her eyes out and just kill her. So the guard or the soldiers, they end up gouging her eyes out and then they stab her in the throat with a sword.
Hmm.
Yeah, it's very gruesome. It's very, very
Hmm.
gruesome. So
I
all
don't
this
like.
to say, this is why. So okay, wait, I'm jumping ahead. Then so they stab her in the throat, and then she really dies because like you can't really
Yeah, you can't really get around that, can
like
you?
not get stabbed in the throat, you know. So
Yeah.
she dies, and when they go to prepare her body for burial, her eyes are still there.
Oh.
And this is actually where she becomes the patron saint of blindness. So somehow her eyes have been magically restored back into her body, even though they were gouged out. So if you ever see a saint, a female saint with like long flowing hair in a church, and she has a plate in her hand with eyeballs on it and a palm in her other hand,
Okay.
that's usually Saint Lucy. That's kind of how she's
How many
depicted
eyeballs are on the
as
plate
a lot of uh,
usually? Okay. I'm like,
two,
okay.
two,
Just
yeah.
her too. Okay.
It's just two. just two symbolic
Yeah,
eyes. Like she has eyes in her head,
she's
and
got
then she's also
spares.
got
Cool.
eyes on the plate. Yeah. Does she have four eyes? We don't know. That could probably lead into the other into the other which kind of idea too if we're not being careful. But there's also, so that is like her main legend, and then there's another story about her where it said that she's actually helping Christians that were hiding in the catacombs in Italy. And in order to bring them in as many supplies as she possibly could, she puts a wreath on her head with a bunch of white tapered candles in it so that she can carry all of the supplies that she needs and still
Hmm.
see her way through the catacombs. And this is kind of where the connection comes in when we're talking about like the Scandinavian traditions. But it's interesting, like how does all of that actually connect to winter solstice? It seems like a
Yeah.
Christian story, but it doesn't. You don't really see where the connection is clearly, right? So when Christians go to the Scandinavian countries to evangelize them, like side note, if any of you guys have ever watched Vikings, that's what the guy in the first season is doing there. He's trying to like change everybody to
Yeah.
Christian, and they're so not into it. So when they start going to these countries and trying to evangelize them to follow the word of God or Christ or whatever, they come with this story of Lucy, and her day of feasting is already connected to the 13th of December. Now we have to go back to this thing. We talk about it in the Saturnalia episode as well. The Julian
Mhm.
calendar versus the Gregorian calendar. Currently, right now, we are in the Gregorian calendar, but the Julian calendar was used for a long time prior to this. So in that time they were still using that
Mhm.
reference, the Julian calendar. Maybe they had a different calendar, I'm not sure, but the dates were still the same. So at that time, winter solstice would have been December 13th. And if you want to understand a bit more about those calendars and how they work, we go into it fully in the Saturnalia episode in this season. So you can listen to that to see what that's all about. But basically, technically, that would have been their solstice. And for them, the idea of this woman, going into the darkness with this wreath of crown, this wreath of light and candles on her head, also very much had similar symbology to what they believed in terms of like the Norse beliefs of the goddesses birthing light back into the world. It kind of connected. So did they, again, we always come into that question, did they make this story to
Mhm.
fit the narrative of the people they were trying to evangelize, or were there just similarities? It's all
Yeah.
speculation, we'll never really know, but
Yeah.
probably both. Let's just say both, but that's kind of how they're connected. So in many of the, obviously there's a whole bunch of different countries in like the Scandinavian part of the world, and but in most of them she is depicted as wearing this wreath of white candles, and she's also wearing a white gown that signifies like a baptismal gown. And in some of those countries she's wearing a red sash, and the red sash is symbolic of her martyrdom, the fact that she died for God. um, it's interesting because in like places like Norway, Denmark, and Sweden, and parts of Finland, they actually do full on, like, this is a big festival, and all of the
Mhm.
girls dress up like Saint Lucy, and they all walk around in these processions, and they carry these saffron buns. Like, saffron is,
Yeah,
you
yeah.
know, the spice of saffron, right? um do you know where that comes from? Side note,
I
do you know
think
what plant it comes from?
it's a crocus.
Yeah, so cool. Anyways, so yeah, so they built these saffron buns. Saffron has this like bright orangey yellow color. It's also connected to light, and the buns are connected to God. So it's also connected to bringing in Christ's light by sharing these like saffron buns and doing this big procession. But and then also apparently boys can take part in this procession by dressing up as other kind of characters from similar stories from around the same time, but the men version, or like dressing up like Santa Clauses or whatever. But this is kind of like part of how they celebrate. And then they also do the processions with candles
Nice. Okay.
as part of that too. And like, it's like what you said, it's that idea of like bringing the light through the
Mhm.
darkness into the day where we're going to see the sun coming back around and longer, and lasting longer. So yeah, that's essentially the story of Saint Lucia. But I thought it was really interesting because I've seen depictions of this, but I never really knew what it was about.
I never really noticed depictions of it, but I'm going to look for it moving forward. Like, is this something, is she depicted in a lot of churches, do you think? Or is it commonly more so in Italy or in France or like,
So, yeah, what I'm understanding is that she has churches. From what I understand, she has churches in Italy, but specifically northern Italy and specifically
uh-huh.
Sicily, because
Okay.
that's where she was actually from. And then also there are churches dedicated to her in England. And then again, I think it's kind of like more, I think where they celebrate it the most is kind of in the Nordic
Right.
Scandinavian
Okay.
parts, and that might be why we don't see, so like, I see a lot of depictions because I have a bizarre interest, like I'm just like very interested in like Swedish culture and Finnish culture, and like I watch like at Christmas time I watch like Finnish and Swedish and Norwegian like TV shows, and like, you know what
Yeah.
I mean?
Yeah.
So
Actually,
I think that's why I've come across it. You know what I mean? It's not like super common for us, I don't
there
think.
is this one show that I watched for Christmas last year. What's the name of it? It's called Home for Christmas. And yeah,
Yeah, it's
it's
really
really,
good.
really good. And
I've been waiting. I've been waiting for another season of this for like
it's
super long.
Norwegian. Yeah, it's Norwegian. And
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
Norwegian.
it's
That's what I
actually
wanted to
a
check.
really
Yeah.
good show. It's really interesting.
It's
I
super good.
watched it too, and then afterwards I started looking into the differences in date culture in like Norwegian
Mm,
countries and like Nordic countries
mm.
versus other places in the world and like or more westernized dating culture. And it's just so fascinating. I found like a ton of scholarly articles on it actually on how the dating culture differs, which is really, really fascinating. That
Mm.
and I would never have looked into it if it wasn't for that show, which is yeah, it's really good.
Yeah. It's honestly one of my favorite Christmas shows, to be honest with you. I think it came out the year before COVID. And then because of COVID, there was a year where they didn't have another season. And then a season came out, and I was like waiting with like bated
Yeah.
breath because I really, really like this show. And then there was like, it seems like there's one every other year. So like I'm keeping my fingers crossed that this year we're gonna get like at least the final season to figure out like what happened with
I
her and
mean,
like
I it
what
it also
situation
like
she's
the way it
in.
left off last season is kind of just like it could be it.
I know, but I hope it's not. I'm like really invested in that show. But yeah, so it's really good. It does give you like those classic kind of Christmas vibes. I think in relation to St. Lucy, you see from what I understood from the reading that I did, and like I said, I'm not like extensively versed on it, but from what I understood, it's really, really big in Sweden. And I know it's
Mhm.
also popular in the other places, but how popular, I'm not so sure. So I know that
Mhm.
apparently in Sweden, they even do a thing where they elect a Saint Lucy or they elect a Lucy, and this Lucy like goes around to like balls and parades and like does like a whole.
Interesting.
It's a really big thing.
That's
Um,
cool.
so it's interesting, and it's a cool. I mean, like it's a cool saint to kind of like if you're gonna go venerate a saint right now, I guess that's a cool one to do. She seems pretty interesting, but also I think it somehow it circles back around to feeling less Christian and more pagan in some way. I don't know. It depends, or I don't
I
know.
mean, well, it seems like it was someone that was
That's
kind
just the
of
way it feels to me, anyway.
mm, at one point Christians weren't the majority, right? They were the minority and they were persecuted, and then pagans later became persecuted. So
Right.
maybe that's the connection where because she
Right.
was persecuted, it seems like it would fall in line with more of a pagan tradition. I don't know.
Maybe. Well, you see it all the time, and you see it even now. Like I know many people that are part of modern, like living here. I know a lot of people that are
Mhm.
part of modern day, like saint cults, essentially. And I don't say cults in the American sense. Say it kind of like in
Yeah.
the European
Yeah.
sense, where they're like devotees of specific saints. You know what I mean? And that's really big here in France, but it has way more of a pagan undertone than it does a Christian undertone. So like Mary Magdalene's a really classic, like probably the most famous example of that, and
Mhm.
this like the priestesshood of the rose and all of that kind of stuff. There are a whole bunch of women that like study this kind of like esoteric mysticism around Mary Magdalene, and they kind of like worship her and they take all of the symbology from her, but it's not really related to the church, even though technically if you wanted to say she belonged to something, you'd
Yeah.
say she belonged to the church, but they see her as her own person. And even the places in France that are dedicated to her are places where other pagan goddesses would have been before. So it kind of
Mhm.
becomes that whole conversation around masking, and it's just what connects at the time. And right now we're kind of in a choose your own adventure phase of spirituality.
It's a good way to put
I
it,
think.
actually.
So yeah, that's kind of it. That's winter solstice in in a nutshell. I'm pretty sure there's I'm pretty sure we could explore a lot more things, but that we would be here way too long.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I hope
Yeah.
that helps to
For sure.
clarify, because I know for a long time I've had a general idea but wasn't able to put it together. And the bright side about it is if you don't consider yourself spiritual, or religious in any particular way, you can still celebrate winter solstice and be like completely
Mm-hmm.
above board, because you can just really go towards like the whole cycle of like nature and change. If you're feeling that, like go that route.
Yeah, it's really at its core, it's just all about the seasonality. And then we've added a bunch of other shit on top of it.
Yeah, we've added so much human emotion into it, right? Because like we can feel
Yeah.
things as like the darkness kind of rolls in, like
Yeah.
if you're connected a little bit, even a little bit, you can feel like that energy, right? So all the rest,
Yeah.
but that's like everything. All the rest is human speculation.
Yeah, we do that. We're creatures that tend to do
We do
that.
it. We like it. We like to talk about it, and that's why this podcast exists. Well,
Oh.
everybody, I hope you guys enjoyed this exploration into solstice, and we invite you to stick around to check out some of the other things we'll be talking about in this season as well. And if you're listening to this just as we posted it, even if you're not, we hope you have a wonderful solstice season, whatever you choose to celebrate,
Yeah.
however you do the things that you do. We hope you do them with a lot of comfort in darkness, and it's okay, and there's always candles.
You got
I was
there.
like, I don't know where I'm
Yay.
going with
I was
this.
like, you're like, you're
At a
going, we're
point, I
going.
lost
Okay.
it, but anyways.
Point sticks. Have an awesome solstice.
Yeah, that's it. Bye.
And
See
we'll
you
see you next
soon.
time.